The Dakota wind cut through the prairie grass like 1,000 invisible knives, each gust carrying the promise of an early winter. Gray clouds hung low over the distant hills, their shadows creeping across the endless expanse of buffalo grass and sagebrush. The year was 1887, and the frontier was changing. Railroads stretched their iron fingers westward. Towns sprouted like weeds after rain, and the old ways were dying beneath the wheels of progress. Nora Campbell pulled her worn woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders as she guided her rickety wagon along the rutted trail. Behind her, the town of Willow Creek, Nebraska, disappeared into the morning mist like a bad dream she was finally waking from. She didn't look back. There was nothing there for her anymore, not since her father's grain business had collapsed, taking with it the family's reputation and her prospects for a respectable marriage. The whispers had followed her everywhere. Poor Campbell girl. Father drank away the fortune. Mother died of shame. She'd endured it for 2 years, working in Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, scrubbing floors and bearing the sneers of people who once called her family friends. The wagon wheels creaked a lonely rhythm as her old mare, Buttercup, plodded forward. Nora had sold everything except the essentials: a cast-iron pot, her mother's Bible, a rifle that had belonged to her grandfather, 2 dresses, and enough food to last perhaps a week. The rest had gone to pay for the wagon and supplies. She was heading to Dakota Territory, where she'd heard there was work at the trading posts, hard work but honest, and far from the poisonous tongues of Willow Creek. By midday, the landscape had shifted from farmland to wild prairie. The sky stretched endlessly above, a pale canvas threatening snow. Nora had stopped to water Buttercup at a small creek when she heard the horses approaching, 3 riders coming fast from the east. Her heart quickened as she recognized the type: drifters, probably displaced cowboys, or worse, the kind of men who haunted the spaces between towns, taking what they wanted from those too weak to resist. "Well, well," the lead rider called out, a gap-toothed man with greasy hair hanging past his collar. "What's a pretty little thing like you doing out here all alone?" Nora's hand moved slowly toward the rifle propped against the wagon seat, but the second rider, younger with cold blue eyes, had already dismounted and was walking toward her. "Now, miss, no need for that. We're just being friendly like." "I want no trouble," Nora said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm just passing through." The third man, heavy-set with a scar across his cheek, laughed. "Passing through with what? I wonder. That's a nice-looking horse you got there. And that wagon might have some interesting cargo." They circled her like wolves, and Nora knew she was in danger. As the scarred man reached for Buttercup's bridle, she made her decision. Grabbing the rifle, she fired a shot into the air. The recoil nearly knocked her backward, but the sound echoed across the prairie like thunder. The horses reared, and in the confusion, Nora slapped Buttercup's flank hard, sending the wagon lurching forward. "Get her!" one of them shouted, but Nora was already whipping the reins. Urging Buttercup into a gallop the old mare could barely manage. The wagon bounced and rattled dangerously over the uneven ground. Behind her, she could hear the men mounting up, their curses carried on the wind. The chase couldn't last long. Buttercup was no match for their younger horses. Ahead, Nora spotted a thick stand of pine trees, unusual on the prairie, but a blessing now. She drove the wagon into the tree line, branches scraping against the canvas cover, until the path became too narrow. Jumping down, she grabbed the rifle and her pack, then slapped Buttercup again, sending the horse and wagon crashing deeper into the woods. Nora ran in the opposite direction, her boots slipping on pine needles, her breath coming in painful gasps. She could hear the men entering the woods, following the wagon's trail, finding a fallen log covered in thick brush. She wedged herself underneath, pulling branches over her hiding spot. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain they would hear it. Minutes passed like hours. She heard them cursing, arguing about whether to follow the wagon or search for her. Finally, the scarred man's voice rang out. "Forget the girl. Take the horse and whatever's in the wagon. We're wasting time." She remained hidden long after their voices faded, until the woods fell silent except for the wind in the pine boughs. When she finally emerged, the sun was low in the sky, painting everything in shades of amber and shadow. She was alone, truly alone now. No horse, no wagon, only what she carried on her back. Nora picked a direction and started walking, the rifle heavy in her arms. The pine forest gradually thinned, giving way to prairie once more, as darkness began to fall, bringing with it a bone-deep cold. She wondered if she'd escaped one danger only to face another. The Dakota territory was vast and unforgiving, and she was a woman alone with the night coming on. It was then she saw him, a figure on horseback, silhouetted against the dying light. Her first instinct was to hide again, but something in the rider's bearing stopped her. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone born to it, and when he turned in her direction, she could see he was native, Lakota. She guessed, from the style of his clothing and the way he wore his long, dark hair. They regarded each other across perhaps 50 yards of prairie grass. Nora tightened her grip on the rifle but didn't raise it. The warrior, for warrior he surely was, with a bow across his back and a knife at his belt, made no threatening moves. His face was unreadable in the fading light, but something in his stillness spoke of assessment rather than aggression. Finally, he spoke, his English accented but clear. "You are far from the wagon trails. I was robbed," Nora admitted, seeing no point in deception. 3 men. They took my wagon." The warrior's horse shifted slightly, and she caught a better glimpse of his face. Strong features, dark eyes that seemed to take in everything. The men who ride like coyotes, taking from those who travel alone. I saw them pass. You are fortunate they did not find you. Do you know where—" she began, then stopped, uncertain what to ask. Where was safe? Where could she go? She had no destination now, only the vague hope of finding work somewhere. "There is a trading post," he said, gesturing northwest. 2 days' walk. McGivern's. He trades in fur and supplies. He paused, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "It is not safe to travel at night. There are wolves, and men worse than wolves." Before Nora could respond, he turned his horse and began to ride away. Then he stopped, looking back over his shoulder. "Follow the creek north until you find the lightning-struck cottonwood. From there, west to the trading post. Do not light a fire tonight. It will draw attention you do not want." "Wait," Nora called out. "What's your name?" He hesitated, and she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I am called Lakota. It means friend to everyone, in your language." There was something almost ironic in the way he said it. "What do they call you?" "Nora. Nora Campbell." He nodded once, then urged his horse forward, disappearing into the gathering darkness as quickly as he had appeared. Nora stood alone on the prairie, the wind picking up, carrying the scent of coming snow. She pulled her shawl tighter and began walking north, following the creek as he had instructed. The night was long and cold. She found shelter of sorts in a small grove of cottonwoods, wrapping herself in her shawl and spare dress, the rifle across her lap. Every sound made her start: the howl of distant wolves, the rustle of small animals in the brush, the constant whisper of wind through dry grass. She thought of the warrior, Lakota, and wondered why he had helped her. Perhaps it was simple human decency, though she'd heard terrible stories about the Lakota in Willow Creek. But then, she'd heard terrible stories about many things that had proved to be lies. As the first pale light of dawn touched the eastern sky, Nora rose, stiff and shivering, and continued her journey. Her feet ached in her worn boots, and hunger gnawed at her stomach. She'd eaten nothing since yesterday morning, but she pressed on, following the creek, watching for the lightning-struck cottonwood. She found it near midday, a massive tree split down the middle, its blackened trunk a testament to nature's power. From there, she turned west as Lakota had instructed, the landscape opening up into rolling hills dotted with patches of snow in the shadowed places. By late afternoon, exhausted and lightheaded from hunger, she finally spotted smoke rising in the distance. As she drew closer, she could make out a cluster of buildings, a main trading post built of logs, several smaller structures, and a corral holding horses and mules. Dogs barked at her approach, and a few men lounging outside the main building looked up with interest. McGivern's trading post was exactly what she'd expected and feared, a rough place on the edge of civilization, serving trappers, traders, soldiers, and anyone else passing through the territory. But it represented survival, and that was all that mattered now. As Nora approached the main building, she held her head high despite her disheveled appearance. Whatever lay ahead, it had to be better than what she'd left behind. She thought again of the Lakota warrior who'd pointed her toward this place, wondering if their paths would cross again. Something in his eyes had spoken of understanding, as if he too knew what it meant to be caught between worlds, to have the ground shift beneath your feet until you no longer knew where you belonged. The door to the trading post swung open, releasing the smell of tobacco smoke, leather, and unwashed men. Nora took a deep breath, adjusted her grip on her grandfather's rifle, and stepped forward into whatever fate awaited her in the Dakota territory. The interior of McGivern's trading post was dim and smoky, lit by oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Behind a counter made of split logs stood a barrel-chested man with graying whiskers, presumably McGivern himself. His sharp eyes assessed Nora from boots to bonnet as she entered. "Help you, miss?" His voice was gruff, but not unkind. "I'm looking for work," Nora said, setting her rifle against the counter. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes, keep accounts." "Can you now?" McGivern interrupted, his bushy eyebrows rising. "And what's a lady who can keep accounts doing out here alone?" Before Nora could answer, laughter erupted from a table in the corner where 4 men sat playing cards, a half-empty whiskey bottle between them. One of them, a lean man with a pock-marked face, called out, "Hey, McGivern, maybe she can warm our beds too. Gets mighty cold at night." The others laughed louder, and Nora felt heat rise in her cheeks. She kept her eyes on McGivern, refusing to acknowledge the comment. "That's enough, Josiah," McGivern said, though without much force. To Nora, he added, "I might have work, but it ain't easy. My last help ran off 2 weeks ago. Couldn't handle the rough crowd. You'd be cooking, cleaning, helping with inventory. Pay is room, board, and $2 a week." "I'll take it," Nora said quickly. "You sure about that? Pretty thing." Another man from the card table had risen, whiskey heavy on his breath as he swayed toward her. He was young, perhaps 25, with dirty blonde hair and hands that looked too eager to grab. "Maybe you'd like to sit on my lap while you think it over?" He reached for her arm, but Nora stepped back, her hand moving instinctively toward the rifle. "Don't touch me. Feisty," the man laughed, lunging forward again. "I like that in a woman." The words died in his throat as the trading post door opened, bringing a gust of cold air. Dakota stood in the doorway, his dark eyes taking in the scene with one swift glance. He entered silently, moving to the counter as if he had business there. But his presence alone was enough to make the drunk man pause. "Dakota," McGivern nodded in greeting. "Come for supplies?" "Yes." Dakota's voice was calm, but he positioned himself between Nora and the drunk man without seeming to... the usual order. The drunk man muttered something under his breath and stumbled back to his card game, shooting dark looks at both Dakota and Nora. The other men had gone quiet, watching the Lakota warrior with a mixture of wariness and resentment. "Miss Campbell here was just accepting a position," McGivern said, his tone suggesting he wanted no trouble in his establishment. "She'll be helping around the post." Dakota glanced at Nora, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "The work is hard," he said quietly, "but McGivern is fair. I'm not afraid of hard work." Nora replied, grateful for his intervention but not wanting to appear weak. McGivern showed Nora to a small room behind the store, barely more than a closet with a narrow cot and a wooden crate for belongings. But it had a door that locked, and after her night on the prairie, it looked like paradise. "You'll start in the morning," McGivern said. "Kitchen's through there, Expect to cook for anywhere from 10 to 20 men, depending on who's passing through. No fraternizing with the customers. Makes trouble. And keep that rifle handy. Most of the boys are harmless, but whiskey makes fools of men. After he left, Nora sat on the cot, finally allowing herself to feel the exhaustion of the past 2 days. Through the thin walls, she could hear the continuous noise of the trading post. Laughter, arguments, the clink of glasses, the scrape of chairs. This was her life now, at least for a while. She emerged later to familiarize herself with the kitchen, a large room dominated by a massive iron stove. As she took inventory of the supplies, she became aware of someone watching her. Lakota stood in the doorway, holding a cloth bundle. "You will need this," he said, offering the bundle. Inside was pemmican, dried meat mixed with fat and berries, a staple food of the Plains tribes. "I can't," Nora began, but he shook his head. "You have not eaten. Weak hands make poor work." His English was careful, precise. "McGivern's food is not good at first. This will help." She accepted the bundle, their fingers briefly touching. His hands were calloused but gentle. "Thank you. Again, I seem to be in your debt." "No debt," he said. "My people believe kindness returns like the circle of seasons." Your people," Nora repeated. "The Lakota." Something shifted in his expression, pain, perhaps, or resignation. "Yes, what remains of us." He turned to go, then paused. "The men here, some are angry at all Indians. They have lost cattle. They say, they blame my people. Be careful who you trust." Over the following days, Nora fell into a routine. She rose before dawn to start the stove and prepare breakfast for whoever had stayed the night. The work was hard, hauling water, cooking over the temperamental stove, scrubbing pots with lye soap that cracked her hands. But she was grateful for the exhaustion that let her fall into dreamless sleep each night. The men who frequented McGivern's were a rough lot: trappers, soldiers on leave, drifters, and traders. Most ignored her after the first few days, treating her as part of the furniture, but there were always eyes watching. Comments muttered just loud enough for her to hear. She kept her rifle in the kitchen while she worked, a reminder that she wasn't helpless. Lakota came to the trading post twice a week, always with furs to trade or picking up supplies for his band. He never stayed long, but he would nod to her in greeting, sometimes leaving small gifts: a rabbit he'd snared, wild onions, medicinal herbs. They began to talk during his brief visits. Careful conversations conducted while she worked, and he waited for McGivern to fill his order. She learned that his band lived a day's ride north, that they were struggling as the buffalo grew scarce and white settlers claimed more land. He learned that she could read and write, that she'd run a household before her father's downfall, that she missed the sound of church bells on Sunday mornings. "You are not like the others here," he said one afternoon, watching her knead bread dough. "Neither are you," she replied. "McGivern says you speak better English than most of his customers." "Where did you learn?" "The mission school," Lakota said, his voice carefully neutral. "They took me when I was 7 winters. Said they would kill the Indian to save the man." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I learned their language, their God, their ways. Then I came home and learned my own ways again." Nora wanted to ask more, but customers entered, 3 cavalry soldiers, their blue uniforms dusty from hard riding. They looked at Lakota with open hostility. "McGivern," one called out. "You letting savages in here now? Man can't drink in peace." "Money's money," McGivern replied evenly. "Dakota's been trading here longer than you've been in the territory. Sergeant." The sergeant spat on the floor near Dakota's feet. "Should have killed every last one of them after Little Bighorn. Give it time. We will." Lakota remained perfectly still, but Nora saw his hand shift slightly toward his knife. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, deliberately, Lakota turned his back on the soldiers and continued his business with McGivern. The soldiers ordered whiskey and settled at a table, their voices growing louder as they drank. Nora tried to concentrate on her work, but she could feel the tension in the room like electricity before a storm. "Hey, Cookie," one of the soldiers called to her. "Bring us some of that stew, and smile while you do it. Might improve the taste." She ladled stew into bowls, her movements sharp with suppressed anger. As she set the bowls on their table, the sergeant grabbed her wrist. "You're too pretty to be working in this hole," he said, his grip tight enough to hurt. "Why don't you come back to the fort with us? Officers' wives need maids." "Let go," Nora said quietly. "Or what?" He laughed, pulling her closer. "You'll get your savage friend to scalp me?" She didn't see Dakota move, but suddenly he was there, his hand on the sergeant's wrist. He didn't speak, just applied pressure until the soldier released Nora with a curse. "You dare touch a white woman?" the sergeant snarled, jumping to his feet. "I dare stop a man from dishonoring himself," Dakota replied calmly. "She asked you to release her." The other soldiers were on their feet now, hands moving toward their sidearms. McGivern emerged from behind the counter, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "That's enough excitement for one day," he said. "Sergeant, you and your boys finish your meal and move on. Dakota, best you head out too." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Dakota stepped back, gathered his supplies, and walked out without another word. The soldiers muttered and cursed, but eventually sat back down. Nora returned to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the wash basin. As sunset painted the sky crimson and gold, she stepped outside for air. The vast prairie stretched endlessly, and somewhere out there, Dakota was riding home to his people. She thought about the controlled fury in his eyes when he'd intervened, the careful way he'd diffused the situation without giving the soldiers an excuse for violence. A sound made her turn. Dakota sat on his horse at the edge of the trading post grounds, waiting. She walked toward him, aware of eyes watching from the windows. "You should not have done that," she said. "They'll make trouble for you now." "They make trouble regardless," he replied. "A man who does nothing while another suffers, he loses part of his spirit. I'm not your responsibility." He studied her for a long moment. "No," he agreed, "but perhaps we are each other's reminder." "Of what?" "That there is still good in this world, even when darkness presses close." Before she could respond, he turned his horse and rode into the gathering dusk. Nora stood watching until he disappeared into the vast landscape, feeling something shift inside her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt since before her world fell apart. Inside the trading post, the lamplights flickered like small defiant stars against the coming night. She squared her shoulders and went back to work, but her thoughts remained on the prairie, following the path of a Lakota warrior who saw her as more than just another refugee from a broken life. In this harsh land where survival was everything, such recognition felt like a gift more valuable than gold. The peace at McGivern's trading post shattered 3 weeks later like ice under a hammer blow. Nora was serving breakfast to a group of fur trappers when she heard the thunder of approaching horses. Many horses, riding hard. Through the window, she saw a dust cloud rising against the morning sun. "Bounty hunters," one of the trappers muttered, peering out. "Jake Morrison and his boys. This ain't gonna be good." Morrison's reputation preceded him, a former Confederate soldier turned manhunter who collected scalps as readily as bounties. He and his dozen men burst through the door like a violent wind, their face hard and dust-covered, rifles prominent. "McGivern!" Morrison shouted. He was a tall man with cold gray eyes and a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. "We're tracking horse thieves. Lost 30 head from the Double Bar Ranch. Trail leads right through here." McGivern emerged from his storeroom, expression carefully neutral. "Haven't seen any stolen horses, Jake. You know I don't trade in questionable goods." "Not the horses we're after," Morrison said, his eyes scanning the room. "The thieves, Indians, Lakota band, from the signs. You trade with a buck named Dakota?" Nora's hand stilled on the coffee pot she was holding. She forced herself to continue pouring, keeping her face blank. "Dakota brings in furs," McGivern said evenly. "Good furs. Fair trade." "Never brought horses." Morrison smiled, but it was all teeth and no warmth. Indians are clever. They don't bring stolen goods where they're known. But someone's helping them move those horses. And I aim to find out who—" His gaze swept the room again, lingering on Nora. "You there, girl? You seen any Indians around here lately?" "I serve food and clean," Nora replied, meeting his stare. "I don't pay attention to the customers." "Pretty little liar," Morrison mused. "Boys, search the place. Check the storeroom, the stables, everywhere. If there's so much as an Indian pony hair, I want to know about it." The bounty hunters spread through the trading post like locusts, overturning goods, rifling through supplies. Nora retreated to the kitchen, her mind racing. Lakota had been here just yesterday, trading winter fox pelts. He'd mentioned his band was moving camp, seeking better shelter before the heavy snows. If Morrison found them— A crash from the storeroom made her jump. Through the doorway, she could see one of Morrison's men dumping grain sacks, searching for hidden contraband. McGivern stood by, jaw clenched, powerless to stop them. "Nothing here, boss," the man finally called. Morrison wasn't satisfied. The buck's gotta be getting supplies somewhere. Food, ammunition. He turned back to McGivern. "When's he usually come?" "No regular schedule." McGivern lied smoothly. "Sometimes weeks between visits." "Then we'll wait." Morrison settled into a chair like he owned the place. "However long it takes, set up camp outside. Boys, we're staying put." For 2 days, the bounty hunters occupied the trading post like an invading army. They drank McGivern's whiskey, ate Nora's food without paying, and made everyone nervous with their constant watchfulness. Morrison questioned every trader and trapper who came through, building a picture of Lakota's movements. On the second night, as Nora was banking the kitchen fire, she heard horses approaching. Her heart sank as she recognized the careful, quiet way Lakota rode. He was walking into a trap. She moved quickly to the window. In the moonlight, she could see him dismounting, unaware of the danger. Without thinking, she grabbed a bucket and headed for the door, as if going to the well. Morrison's voice stopped her. "Where you headed, miss?" "Water," she said, lifting the bucket. "For morning. One of the boys can get that?" His smile was predatory. "Wouldn't want you out there in the dark. Dangerous for a woman alone." She was trapped. Through the window, she watched Lakota approach, leading a pack horse. In moments, he would walk through that door and into Morrison's hands. Desperate, she dropped the bucket with a loud clatter, then knocked over a stack of pans as she bent to retrieve it. The noise was tremendous in the quiet night. "Clumsy girl," Morrison snarled. But the damage was done. Outside, Lakota had frozen, alert to danger. He melted back into the shadows just as Morrison's men burst out the door. "There! I saw movement!" one shouted. "After him!" Morrison commanded. "Alive if possible. The bounty's better that way." The night erupted in chaos. Gunfire split the darkness as Morrison's men spread out, searching. Nora heard horses screaming, men cursing, the crack of rifles. McGivern pulled her back from the window. "Stay down, girl. Nothing you can do now." But she couldn't just cower while Lakota was hunted. As Morrison and most of his men joined the chase, she slipped out the back door. The prairie was a confusion of shadows and moonlight, punctuated by muzzle flashes. She found Lakota's pack horse wandering loose, its lead rope dragging. Following the rope's path, she discovered supplies scattered on the ground and blood. A trail of dark droplets led toward a cluster of rocks. "Lakota?" she whispered. Movement in the shadows. She found him pressed against a boulder, his left shoulder dark with blood, even wounded. He held his rifle ready. "You should not be here," he said through gritted teeth. "Neither should you. I tried to warn you." "I know. I heard." He winced as he shifted position. "My horse ran. I cannot outrun them on foot." Shouts echoed across the prairie. Morrison's men were systematically searching. They had perhaps minutes before being discovered. "The old mine shaft," Nora said suddenly. "A quarter-mile north, abandoned. Can you walk?" He nodded, though she could see the effort it cost him. Supporting his weight, she guided him through the darkness. behind them. The search was intensifying. Someone had found the blood trail. The mine shaft was a black mouth in the hillside, partially collapsed and overgrown with brush. They squeezed through the narrow opening just as lantern light appeared on the prairie below. Inside was pitch black and cold. Nora helped Dakota sink to the ground, then felt her way back to pile more brush across the entrance. They could hear Morrison's men outside, voices carrying in the still night. "Trail ends here. Must have doubled back. Check every rock, every bush. He's hit. Can't have gone far." For hours they searched while Nora and Dakota huddled in the darkness. She tore strips from her petticoat to bind his shoulder, working by touch alone. He remained silent despite what must have been considerable pain. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit moved away. Dawn light was filtering through the brush when Nora finally dared to speak. "They're gone, for now. They will return." Dakota's voice was weak. "Morrison does not give up, and now you are marked too. They will know you helped me. I couldn't let them take you, not for something you didn't do." "How do you know I did not take the horses?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because I know you. You're not a thief." "You know very little of me," he said softly. "What I have done to protect my people, to survive, I know enough." She checked his bandage, relieved to find the bleeding had stopped. "We need to get you somewhere safe. Your people." "No, I will not lead Morrison to them." He struggled to sit up straighter. "There is a place, hidden, but I do not know if I can reach it. Then we'll go together." "You cannot. Your life here is finished anyway," Nora interrupted. "Morrison knows I warned you. I can't go back." They waited until full daylight, when Morrison's men would likely be regrouping at the trading post. Dakota could walk, though slowly, leaning heavily on a makeshift crutch. Nora carried what supplies she could salvage from his scattered goods. The journey was agonizing. Every few hundred yards they had to rest. Dakota's face gray with pain and loss of blood. Nora constantly watched their back trail, expecting to see dust clouds signaling pursuit. By afternoon, they reached Dakota's destination, a small canyon hidden by a fold in the hills. A spring bubbled from the rocks, creating a tiny oasis of green. At the back of the canyon, screened by boulders, was a natural cave. "Emergency shelter," Dakota explained as they stumbled inside. "From the old days, when my grandfather's people fought the Crow." The cave was stocked with dried food, blankets, even firewood. Nora helped Dakota to a buffalo robe bed, then properly cleaned and dressed his wound. The bullet had passed through the muscle of his shoulder, painful but not fatal if infection didn't set in. As she worked, their closeness was both necessary and unsettling. She was acutely aware of his skin under her hands, the controlled way he breathed through the pain, the way his dark eyes watched her face. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why risk everything for an Indian you barely know?" Nora tied off the fresh bandage before answering. "Because you saw me as a person when others saw only a servant or a target. Because you helped me when you had no reason to." She met his gaze. "Because it was right." "Right," he repeated softly. Such a simple word for such a complicated world. Outside, the wind picked up, whistling through the canyon. They were safe for now, but Nora knew this was only a temporary refuge. Morrison would keep hunting, and winter was coming. Everything had changed in a single night, throwing her into Dakota's world of hiding and survival. As darkness fell, she built a small fire, careful to use dry wood that would produce little smoke. They shared pemmican and water in companionable silence, despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of tomorrow. Nora felt a strange peace. Here in this hidden cave with a wounded warrior, she was more herself than she'd been in months of safe routine at the trading post. "Sleep," Dakota said, noticing her exhaustion. "I will keep watch." "You're the one who needs rest. I have slept in worse places with worse wounds." His smile was faint but real. "You saved my life today. Nora Campbell, let me guard yours tonight." She curled up in a blanket near the fire, acutely aware of his presence in the shadows. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, and the wind sang through the canyon walls. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new decisions. But tonight, in this small circle of firelight, they had carved out a moment of safety in a dangerous world. Just before sleep took her, she heard Dakota's voice, soft as the wind. "Thank you." The words followed her into dreams where the prairie stretched endless and free, where no one hunted them, where a Lakota warrior and a displaced white woman could simply exist without the weight of two worlds pulling them apart. 5 days passed in the hidden canyon before Dakota's shoulder healed enough to travel. During those days, a cautious intimacy grew between them, born of shared danger and forced proximity. Nora learned to read the subtle changes in his expression, while he seemed to anticipate her needs before she voiced them. They moved around each other in the small space with careful courtesy, aware of every accidental touch. On the 6th morning, Dakota announced they could no longer delay. "My people need to know about Morrison, and you cannot stay here through winter." They traveled by night, following paths known only to the Lakota. By dawn, they crested a ridge and saw the village spread below, perhaps 20 teepees arranged in a circle beside a narrow stream. Dogs barked at their approach, and children ran to alert the adults. The reception was mixed. Some greeted Dakota with relief and joy, speaking rapid Lakota that Nora couldn't understand. Others stared at her with suspicion and hostility. An elderly woman with silver braids stepped forward, her weathered face stern. "Winona," Dakota said in English, for Nora's benefit. "This is Nora Campbell. She saved my life." Winona's dark eyes studied Nora intensely. "The white woman from the trading post. We have heard of you." She spoke English with a heavy accent. "You brought trouble here." The trouble was already coming. "Grandmother," Dakota said respectfully, "Morrison seeks any excuse to attack us." A younger man pushed through the crowd, his face angry. "She will bring soldiers. Already they search for you both. We should send her away. She risked everything to warn me." "Maka," Dakota replied sharply. "Would you have me repay courage with cowardice?" The argument continued in Lakota, voices rising. Nora stood quietly, understanding she was the subject of debate, even if she couldn't follow the words. Finally, an older man wearing an eagle feather raised his hand for silence. "She may stay," he announced in English, "but she must live as one of us. No special treatment. If she brings harm to our people, she leaves." And so began Nora's immersion into Lakota life. Winona, despite her initial hostility, took charge of her education. The old woman was a harsh but fair teacher, showing Nora how to properly prepare buffalo hide, gather edible plants, and maintain a teepee. "Your hands are soft," Winona commented on the 3rd day, as Nora struggled with scraping a hide. "City hands, but you do not complain. That is good." The work was harder than anything at McGivern's. Nora's back ached from bending over the hide frames. Her fingers bled from the scraping tools, and the constant outdoor labor in cold weather left her exhausted. But there was something deeply satisfying about it too, creating useful things with her own hands, being part of a community where everyone contributed. The children were the first to accept her, fascinated by her pale hair and blue eyes. They taught her basic Lakota words, giggling at her pronunciation. Through them, she began to understand the rhythm of village life, the morning prayers, the evening gatherings, the constant work of survival. Dakota kept a respectful distance during the days, busy with hunting and council meetings, but in the evenings, he would find reasons to check on her progress, bringing her salve for her blistered hands or explaining the significance of various customs. "You are trying too hard," he told her one evening, finding her practicing Lakota phrases by firelight. "Language comes from the heart, not the head. Easy for you to say. You learned English as a child, under the strap of teachers who beat us for speaking our own tongue," he said quietly. "Your way is better." These glimpses of his past came rarely, like flashes of lightning illuminating a dark landscape. She learned he had a sister who died at the mission school, that his parents had been killed in a cavalry raid when he was 15, that he had earned his warrior status defending the village from Crow raiders. 2 weeks into her stay, A hunting party returned with disturbing news. Morrison's bounty hunters had attacked a peaceful camp to the south, killing 3 men and taking scalps. The army claimed it was justified retaliation for the stolen horses. "We must move," Chief Red Sky announced. "Further north into the mountains. It will be harder living, but safer." The village prepared to relocate with practiced efficiency. Tipis came down. Belongings were packed on travois, and within a day they were ready to move. Nora worked alongside the women, earning approving nods for her growing competence. The journey north was grueling. Snow began falling the second day, and the temperature plummeted. Nora walked beside the travois, her feet numb in her worn boots. When she stumbled, Lakota appeared at her side. "Ride," he said, indicating his horse. "I can walk. Pride is a luxury we cannot afford here." His tone was gentle, but firm. "You are no good to anyone with frozen feet." She mounted behind him, forced to wrap her arms around his waist for balance. The warmth of his body was almost painful against her frozen hands. They rode in silence, but she felt the tension in his muscles, the careful way he held himself. That night, camped in a sheltered valley, Winona pulled Nora aside. "You look at him. He looks at you. This is dangerous. I don't know what you mean. Do not insult my intelligence, child." The old woman's eyes were knowing. "A Lakota warrior and a white woman? This path leads only to sorrow. We're friends. He saved my life. I saved his." Winona made a dismissive sound. "I have lived long enough to know the difference between friendship and what grows between you two. But perhaps you are right. Perhaps sorrow is worth it for a little warmth in this cold world." They reached the new campsite after 5 days of travel, a protected valley high in the foothills, surrounded by pine forests and natural barriers. It was more isolated but also more defensible. As the village settled in, Nora found herself truly accepted. She had her own small teepee now, set slightly apart but still within the circle. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Lakota visited her teepee for the first time. He brought firewood and news from the council meeting. "Scouts report Morrison has given up the search. For now. He claims you were kidnapped, that I forced you to help me." Nora laughed bitterly. "Of course, a white woman couldn't possibly choose to help an Indian. It may work in our favor, if you are a victim, not a willing participant. They might allow you to return to white society without punishment." She looked up sharply. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. "What I want does not matter. Winter is coming. Life here will only get harder. You have seen how some still resent your presence. If you wish to leave, I will take you to Fort Laramie myself. And if I wish to stay," he finally met her eyes, and she saw turmoil there. "Then you must understand what that means. You would not just be choosing hardship. You would be choosing to stand between two worlds that grow further apart each day. You would be neither white nor Lakota. Always suspect to both. I've been between worlds since my father's disgrace." Nora said softly. "At least here, I'm useful, needed." "Is that all?" His voice was barely above a whisper. The question hung between them like a held breath. Nora felt her heart racing, knew they stood at the edge of something that would change everything. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the strength and vulnerability she'd come to cherish. "No," she admitted. "That's not all." He closed his eyes briefly, as if in pain. "Nora." "I know," she interrupted. "I know all the reasons why this is impossible. Winona has listed them thoroughly, but my heart doesn't seem to care about reasons. Nor does mine," he confessed. "When Morrison's men were hunting me, my first thought was not of my own death, but that I would never see you again. When you appeared in that darkness, bleeding for me." He shook his head. "I have tried to keep distance between us. I have failed. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, but inside the teepee, the world had shrunk to just the two of them, and the truth they could no longer deny." "What do we do?" Nora asked. "I do not know. Among my people, courting has rules, traditions. but you are not Lakota. And I am caught between honoring you as you deserve and protecting you from a choice that may destroy you. I'm stronger than you think. I know your strength," he said fiercely. "I have seen it. But strength cannot change the color of your skin or mine. It cannot stop the hatred growing between our peoples. It cannot prevent the war that everyone knows is coming." They sat in silence, the weight of the future pressing down on them. Finally, Dakota rose to leave. At the tipi entrance, he paused. "Whatever happens," he said without turning, "know that you have brought light to a warrior who had forgotten its existence." After he left, Nora sat alone, watching the fire die to embers. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. She thought of the crossroads before her, the safe path back to her own kind, or the dangerous journey into unknown territory with a man whose very existence challenged everything she'd been taught. In the dying firelight, she made her choice. Tomorrow she would tell Winona she wished to learn the courting customs of the Lakota. Whatever sorrow lay ahead, she would face it. Some things were worth the price of pain. The wind sang through the valley, and somewhere in the distance, wolves howled at the moon. But Nora felt no fear. She had found something worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for. In this hidden valley, between two worlds, she had discovered where she belonged, not to a place or a people, but to the profound connection with a warrior who saw her truly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, she held close the memory of his words and the promise of light in the darkness. Winter descended upon the mountain valley with a vengeance. By December, snow lay 5 feet deep, and the temperature plunged so low that breath froze in the air. The Lakota band, already struggling with dwindling supplies, faced their harshest season in memory. Nora had adapted to the daily rhythms of survival, melting snow for water, rationing the preserved meat and dried berries, keeping the teepee fires burning through endless frozen nights. But nothing had prepared her for the bone-deep cold that seemed to seep into her very soul. "The old ones say this winter has teeth," Winona observed one morning, her weathered hands working to repair a torn buffalo robe. "It bites deep and does not let go." Food became the primary concern. The heavy snows made hunting nearly impossible, and the preserved supplies dwindled faster than anticipated. Children grew quiet and listless, their usual energy conserved for warmth. The elderly suffered most, though they complained least. Dakota led hunting parties out whenever the weather briefly cleared, but they returned more often empty-handed than not. The deer had moved to lower elevations, and the smaller game had gone to ground. Nora watched him grow thinner, his face drawn with worry for his people. One evening in late December, as another blizzard howled outside, Nora noticed a young mother, Singing Bird, trying to quiet her crying infant. The baby's wails were weak, hungry. "When did you last eat?" Nora asked in her improving Lakota. Singing Bird looked away. "Yesterday, maybe before. The little ones need it more." Without hesitation, Nora fetched her own meager portion of pemmican and pressed it into the woman's hands. "For the baby," she insisted. Word of her gesture spread quietly through the camp. That night, Dakota appeared at her teepee with a small bundle. "You gave away your food," he said, not quite a question. "The children need it more than I do. And what of your needs?" His dark eyes searched her face, noting the hollows beneath her cheekbones. "You grow thin like the rest of us, but you did not grow up learning to survive on little." "I'm learning now," she said with forced lightness. "Winona says I'm too stubborn to starve." He didn't smile. Instead, he opened the bundle to reveal a small portion of dried meat. "From my share, and before you argue, know that a warrior cannot protect his people if he watches the woman he stopped, catching himself. "If he allows you to weaken yourself through generosity." She accepted the food, their fingers brushing in the exchange. These small touches had become their language, saying what words could not in a community where every action was observed and judged. January brought a brief thaw, raising hopes, but it was followed by an ice storm that coated everything in a crystalline shell. Tree branches snapped under the weight, sounding like rifle shots in the night. Several tippies damaged by falling limbs had to be hastily repaired. It was during this storm that the sickness began. First, it was just a cough among the children, then fever. Within days, half the village was ill with what Winona grimly identified as lung fever, pneumonia brought on by the cold and weakened conditions. The medicine man, Joseph Crowfeather, worked tirelessly with traditional remedies, but supplies of healing herbs were limited. Nora threw herself into caring for the sick, drawing on half-remembered treatments from her childhood. She made poultices for the chest, kept the fevered cool and the chilled warm, and spooned thin broth between cracked lips. For days, she barely slept, moving from teepee to teepee like a ghost. "You push too hard," Dakota warned, catching her as she swayed on her feet outside the medicine lodge. "People are dying," she said flatly. 3 elders had already succumbed, and more teetered on the edge. "I can't stop. You can't help them if you fall ill yourself," as if his words were prophecy. Nora woke the next morning burning with fever. Her body shook with chills even as sweat soaked through her clothes. She tried to rise, to continue her rounds, but her legs wouldn't support her. Winona found her collapsed beside the fire. The old woman's face creased with concern as she felt Nora's burning forehead. "Foolish girl," she muttered, but her hands were gentle as she helped Nora to her sleeping robes. "You whites always think you must save everyone. Sometimes the best help is knowing when to rest." The fever took hold quickly. Nora drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the alternating waves of burning heat and freezing cold. In her delirium, she was back in Nebraska, her father raging about his losses while her mother wept. Then she was on the prairie, Morrison's men closing in, their faces twisted with hate. Through it all, she sensed a presence beside her. Strong hands lifted her head to drink bitter tea. A voice chanted in Lakota, prayers, she thought dimly. When the chills racked her body, warm furs appeared. When the fever spiked, cool cloths bathed her face. Time lost all meaning. Day and night blurred together in a haze of sickness. She heard voices arguing, Winona insisting someone needed to rest, a man's voice refusing to leave. Dakota, she realized. He was there, had been there all along. In a moment of clarity, she opened her eyes to find him sitting beside her, his face haggard with exhaustion and worry. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the tippy walls. "You should be helping others," she managed to whisper. "The others are not you," he said simply. He leaned closer, pressing a hand to her forehead. "The fever is breaking, but you burn still, like a flame that consumes itself. So tired," she murmured. "Then rest. I will watch over you." His hand found hers, engulfing it in warmth. "When I was young, my grandmother told me a story about a warrior who loved a star. Every night he would climb the highest mountain to be closer to her light. The star, moved by his devotion, came to Earth to be with him. But stars are not meant for Earth." She began to fade, to burn out. "What happened?" The warrior prayed to the spirits. He offered his own light, his own life force, to keep her burning bright. Dakota's thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. The spirits were moved by his sacrifice. They allowed the star to remain on Earth, no longer burning alone but sharing the warrior's fire. Together, they were stronger than apart. Through her fever-hazed mind, Nora understood. This was as close to a declaration as he could make, hear where others might hear. She squeezed his hand weakly. "Don't let me burn out," she whispered. He leaned down, his lips barely brushing her forehead in a gesture that could be taken as checking her temperature but felt like so much more. "Never," he breathed against her skin. "You're burning with fever. Let me cool you." The words, spoken with such tender intensity, followed her back into dreams. But these were healing dreams now, filled with starlight and warmth rather than fear and loss. When she finally woke properly, weak but lucid, 3 days had passed. Sunlight filtered through the teepee smoke hole. Actual sunlight, not the dim gray of storm clouds. Winona sat nearby, grinding herbs, Ah, she returns to us. The old woman said, "Good. That warrior of yours was about to follow you to the spirit world out of sheer stubbornness. Is he?" "Sleeping, finally. In his own tipi on my orders. First rest he's had in days." Winona's expression softened slightly. "He would not leave you. Fed you medicine drop by drop. Sang the old songs to guide your spirit back. Even Joseph Crowfeather was impressed." Nora struggled to sit up, still weak but no longer burning. "The others? The sick?" "The worst has passed. We lost 2 more elders, but the children recover. Your white medicine and our traditions together seem to help." Winona handed her a cup of warm broth. "Drink. You need strength." As Nora sipped the broth, she noticed something different in Winona's manner, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "You nearly died helping our people," the old woman said quietly. "Even when you burned with fever, you called out names of the sick children, worried for them. This is not the way of someone who stays for a season and leaves. This is the way of family." Tears pricked Nora's eyes. "I just did what anyone would—" "No," Winona interrupted firmly. "You did what a daughter of the Lakota would do, what a woman who loves deeply would do." She paused, studying Nora with those penetrating eyes. "That warrior who would not leave your side, he has chosen. The question now is whether you understand what that means." Before Nora could respond, excited voices rose outside. People were emerging from their teepees, pointing at the sky. Nora wrapped a blanket around herself and stepped out into blindingly bright sunshine. The storm had broken. The sky stretched endlessly blue above the white-capped mountains. Ice crystals in the air created tiny rainbows, and the temperature, while still cold, had risen enough to make being outside bearable. Across the camp, she saw Dakota standing with other warriors, organizing a hunting party to take advantage of the weather break. As if sensing her gaze, he turned. Their eyes met across the distance, and the relief and joy on his face made her heart skip. He started toward her, then checked himself, aware of the watching eyes, but his message was clear in every line of his body. She was alive. She was recovering, and that was all that mattered in this moment. "Come," Winona said, guiding her back inside. "You are not strong enough yet for dramatic reunions. But soon, when you are well, there are traditions to follow, ceremonies to observe. If you are to stay, truly stay, it must be done properly." As Nora settled back into her robes, still weak but filled with new hope, she thought about fire and stars, about sacrifice and choosing. The winter was far from over, but they had survived its worst bite. And in surviving, something had crystallized between her and Dakota, refined by trial into something unbreakable. Outside, she could hear the camp coming alive with renewed energy. Children laughed again, and women sang as they worked. The hunting party was preparing to depart, their chances improved by the clear weather. She closed her eyes, not in fever this time, but in gratitude. She had been burning with fever, and he had cooled her, not by diminishing her flame, but by sharing his own strength, his own warmth. Together, they had weathered the storm. Spring was still months away, but for the first time since winter's grip had tightened, it felt possible. They would survive, all of them, together. The successful hunt brought fresh meat to the village, lifting spirits that had been crushed by winter's weight. As Nora regained her strength over the following weeks, she noticed a change in how the people treated her. No longer was she the outsider to be watched with suspicion. She had bled for them, nearly died for them, and that had forged a bond stronger than blood. One evening, as February's grip began to loosen slightly, Dakota formally approached her teepee. He wore his finest clothing, a beaded shirt and leggings that Nora recognized as ceremonial dress. Behind him stood Joseph Crowfeather and the 2 other elders. "Nora Campbell," Dakota said formally, though his eyes held warmth. "I come to speak of important matters." She invited them in, her heart racing as she served tea with hands that barely trembled. The elders arranged themselves around the fire while Dakota remained standing. You have lived among us through the hardest season. Joseph Crowfeather began. You have shown courage, compassion, and sacrifice. The people have spoken. If you wish it, you may undergo the ceremony to become one of us. Not just a guest, but family. Nora's breath caught. She looked at Dakota, who was watching her intently. And then, she asked softly. Then, Dakota said, I would be free to court you properly, according to our ways, if that is something you would welcome. The elders pretended not to notice the charge between them, maintaining formal expressions. But Joseph Crowfeather's eyes twinkled slightly. I would be honored, Nora said, addressing the elders but looking at Dakota, more honored than I can express. The ceremony was set for the next full moon. Winona took charge of Nora's preparation with renewed energy, teaching her the songs she would need to know, the significance of each ritual element. You understand, this is not just about him, Winona said one afternoon as she helped Nora practice beading. When you become Lakota, you accept all of us, our struggles, our fate. The white world will see you as a traitor. The white world already cast me out, Nora replied. Here, I found home. The old woman nodded approvingly. Good, you will need that strength. As the ceremony approached, Dakota began his formal courtship. Despite the harsh conditions, he found ways to show his devotion. He left small gifts at her tipi entrance, a perfectly white rabbit pelt, a carved wooden comb, the choicest portions from his hunts. In the evenings, he would play his flute outside her teepee, the haunting melodies speaking what words could not. The other young women giggled and whispered, sharing knowing looks. Even the warriors teased Dakota about his obvious devotion, but there was approval in their joking. He had chosen well, and she had proven worthy. The night of the ceremony, the full moon cast silver light across the snow. The entire village gathered in the central clearing. Nora wore a dress Winona had helped her make, soft deerskin decorated with beads and patterns that told her story, the star that fell to earth, the flame that burned bright. Joseph Crowfeather led the ceremony, his voice rising and falling in ancient rhythms. Nora repeated the words Winona had taught her, pledging herself to the Lakota way of life. She felt the weight of the moment. She was not just changing her life, but her very identity. When it came time for the naming, Joseph Crowfeather smiled. You shall be called Peta Win, Firewoman, for you burn with a flame that warms but does not consume, that guides but does not destroy. The people cheered and drummed their approval. Dakota's face shone with pride and something deeper, a love so profound it took Nora's breath away. After the ceremony, there was feasting with what food could be spared, and dancing despite the cold. For one night, the hardships were forgotten in celebration. Nora, Peta Win now, felt embraced by a warmth that had nothing to do with the bonfire, as tradition demanded. Dakota approached her formally before all the people. Peta Win, he said, his voice carrying clearly. I wish to court you. Will you accept my attention? I will, she replied. And another cheer went up. The courtship rituals of the Lakota were both public and private. During the days, they were rarely alone, always under the watchful eyes of chaperones. But Dakota found ways to express his feelings, through songs, through the gifts he continued to leave, through the way his eyes followed her movements. In the evenings, they were allowed to walk together, though always within sight of the village. They talked of everything and nothing, their dreams, their fears, the future they hardly dared imagine. When spring comes, Dakota said one evening as they watched the sunset paint the mountains gold, the army will return. Morrison will not have forgotten. Then we face it together, Nora said simply. Whatever comes. He took her hand, the first time he had done so openly. You humble me. Peta Win, I am a warrior who has faced many dangers, but you face the unknown with such grace. Not unknown, she corrected. Not anymore. I know who I am now. I know where I belong. March arrived with a blizzard that seemed like winter's last angry protest. But then, suddenly, the weather broke. Warm winds from the south began melting the snow. Icicles dripped from the tipis, and the stream began to run freely again. With the thaw came both hope and danger. Food would become easier to find, but so would their village. One morning, scouts reported seeing army patrols in the valleys below. Chief Red Sky called a council. "We must decide," he said gravely. "Stay hidden and hope they pass, or move again before they find us." The debate was intense. Some argued for staying. The children and elderly were weak from winter. Others wanted to flee immediately. Lakota spoke for preparedness. "We should send out more scouts, know their numbers, their intentions, then decide." It was agreed. Lakota led one of the scouting parties, leaving before dawn. Nora watched him go with a heavy heart, remembering another departure that had nearly ended in tragedy. 2 days passed with no word. Then, on the third morning, the scouts returned at a gallop. Lakota's face was grim as he reported to the chief. "A full company of cavalry, moving systematically up the valleys. Morrison rides with them as a guide. They will find us within days." The village erupted in controlled chaos. The decision was made to move immediately. But to where? The mountains were still treacherous with snow. The valleys crawled with soldiers. "There is a place," Lakota said quietly. "Sacred caves, further north. Difficult to reach, but defensible." The cavalry horses could not follow. As the people prepared for another flight, Nora found herself at the center of a whispered controversy. Some blamed her presence for drawing Morrison's persistence. She overheard Maka arguing with others. "She is the reason they hunt so hard. Send her away, and they might leave us in peace." "She is one of us now," another warrior countered. "We do not abandon family." That night, as teepees came down and belongings were packed, Lakota came to her. "Some say you should leave," he said without preamble. "That your presence endangers everyone." "Some would be right," Nora replied steadily, though her heart ached. "If my leaving would keep the people safe—" "No," his voice was fierce. "That is not our way, and it would not save us. Morrison uses you as an excuse, but his hatred runs deeper. He would hunt us regardless. Then we run together." "Together," he agreed. Then, softer, "When this is over, when we find safety, I will speak to the elders about marriage. I am tired of courtship rituals when every day might be our last." "Lakota," he silenced her with a finger to her lips. "No arguments. I have decided. A warrior chooses his battles, and you, Peter Wynn, are worth any battle." The evacuation began that night under cover of darkness. The people moved like ghosts. Centuries of practice in swift, silent relocation serving them well. Nora had learned enough to be helpful rather than a burden, efficiently packing her teepee and supplies. As dawn broke, the village site was empty save for cold fire pits. The band moved in scattered groups to avoid leaving too obvious a trail, planning to reunite at the sacred caves. Nora traveled with Winona and the other women, while Lakota and the warriors provided a rear guard. They had made it halfway to the caves when disaster struck. A cavalry patrol, out earlier than expected, spotted one of the groups. The sharp crack of rifle fire echoed across the mountainside. "Run, Winona commanded, pushing Nora forward. "To the caves! Go!" But Nora could see Lakota and his warriors wheeling their horses to engage the soldiers, buying time for the fleeing families. Without thought, she grabbed her rifle and ran toward the sound of battle rather than away. The scene was chaos. Soldiers firing from cover, warriors using the terrain to their advantage. The screams of horses and men. She saw Lakota trading shots with a sergeant, saw Morrison himself directing troops to flank the Lakota position. A young warrior fell from his horse, clutching his side. Nora ran to him, dragging him to cover as bullets whined overhead. It was Maka, the same man who had argued for sending her away. His eyes widened in shock as she pressed her hands against his wound. "Why?" he gasped. "Because you're family," she said firmly, tearing strips from her dress to bind the wound. "Family doesn't abandon family." The battle raged on. But the warrior's sacrifice was working. The main body of the village was escaping toward the caves. Nora helped Maka onto a horse, then looked for Lakota in the melee. She found him cornered by 3 soldiers. His ammunition spent. Without hesitation, she raised her rifle and fired, dropping one soldier and causing the others to seek cover. Lakota used the distraction to escape, catching her eye with a look of gratitude and fear for her safety. "The caves!" he shouted. "Now!" Together they ran, along with the remaining warriors, conducting a fighting retreat up the treacherous mountain paths. Morrison's curses echoed behind them, but the soldiers' horses were struggling with the terrain. As they climbed higher, snow began to fall, a late spring storm providing cover. By the time they reached the sacred caves, visibility was near zero. The people poured into the cave system, grateful for shelter, but their relief was short-lived. Morrison and his troops had made camp below, settling in for a siege. They were trapped, safe for the moment, but with limited food and no escape route. As night fell and the storm intensified outside, Lakota found Nora tending to the wounded. Without words, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You should have run to safety," he murmured into her hair. "There is no safety without you." She replied. Around them, the people settled in for what might be a long siege, but there was a different quality to how they looked at Nora now. She had stood and fought beside them, bled with them. Maka, his wound bound with her torn dress, spoke quietly to others, and she saw nods of acceptance, of respect. Whatever came next, siege, battle, or miracle, she would face it as Peta Win, firewoman of the Lakota. The transformation that had begun with a chance meeting on the prairie was complete. She had found her place, her people, her purpose, and the man who held her in the darkness of the sacred cave. He was no longer just her savior or her love. He was her future, whatever that future might bring. The siege stretched into its 3rd day. Inside the sacred caves, the Lakota band rationed their meager supplies while Morrison's soldiers maintained their positions below. The storm had passed, leaving crystal-clear skies that made any escape attempt visible for miles. Lakota stood at the cave entrance, studying the soldiers' camp through the dawn light. Beside him, Chief Red Sky and the other war leaders discussed their dwindling options. "They have sent riders," one scout reported. "More soldiers will come. Then we must act before they arrive." Lakota said, "Wait longer, and we face an army instead of a company." Nora approached with water for the leaders, and Lakota drew her aside. His face was grave. "Morrison sent a messenger under a white flag yesterday. He offers terms." "What terms?" "The band can go free if they surrender you and me. He claims we are the only ones he wants, me for the horses, you for helping a fugitive. The others are considering it. Some are." His jaw tightened. "Maka speaks against it, which surprises me. He says you proved yourself in battle, but others have children to think of." Before Nora could respond, commotion erupted deeper in the caves. A young boy had discovered something, a narrow passage leading deeper into the mountain. Joseph Crowfeather emerged from exploring it, his eyes bright with hope. "The old stories were true," he announced. "This passage leads through the mountain. My grandfather spoke of it, a sacred path used in the ancient days. It emerges on the far side, beyond the soldiers' reach." Hope rippled through the people, but it was tempered with concern. The passage was narrow, treacherous. The elderly and wounded would struggle, and they would have to move in complete darkness to avoid detection. "We go tonight," Chief Red Sky decided. "No moon. Everyone must be ready." The day was spent in preparation. Supplies were redistributed for the journey, with the strongest carrying extra to help the weakest. Nora worked alongside Winona, preparing bandages and gathering what medical supplies they had for Maka and the other wounded. As darkness fell, Morrison's voice echoed up from below, amplified by the mountain walls. "Last chance. Indians, send out the woman and Lakota, or we come in shooting at dawn." The people began filing into the narrow passage, guided by warriors with torches. It was slow, dangerous work. The path was barely wide enough for one person, with drops into unseen depths on one side. Nora was helping support Maka when the attack came early. Morrison had lied about waiting for dawn. Gunfire erupted at the main cave entrance where the rear guard still waited. In the confusion, torches were dropped, plunging sections of the passage into darkness. "Keep moving," Dakota's voice rang out. He was with the rear guard, holding off the soldiers' advance. The sound of fighting echoed through the caves. Gunshots, war cries, the clash of combat in confined spaces. Nora got Maka to safety, then fought against the stream of fleeing people to go back. She found chaos. Soldiers had breached the cave entrance, and fierce fighting filled the chamber. In the torchlight, she saw Dakota grappling with a soldier, his rifle empty. She grabbed a fallen soldier's weapon and fired, covering Dakota as he retrieved his knife. Together, they fought side by side, falling into an instinctive rhythm. But more soldiers kept coming. "The passage!" Dakota shouted. "We have to seal it!" She understood immediately. The cave narrowed at one point. If they could collapse it, the soldiers couldn't follow. Several warriors had the same thought, working to dislodge rocks while others held the soldiers back. Morrison himself appeared in the cave mouth, his face twisted with rage. "There she is! The traitor! $10 to the man who brings her to me alive!" A young soldier charged at Nora. Dakota intercepted him, and they went down in a tangle of limbs. Morrison raised his rifle, aiming at Dakota's exposed back. Without thinking, Nora threw herself forward, firing as she moved. Her shot went wide, but it forced Morrison to dodge. His return fire caught her in the side, spinning her around. The pain was immediate and shocking, but she stayed on her feet, raising the rifle again. "Nora!" Dakota had dispatched the soldier and saw her bleeding. His face transformed with fury. He launched himself at Morrison with a warrior's cry that seemed to shake the cave walls. The two men collided with brutal force. Morrison was larger, but Dakota fought with the desperation of a man protecting everything he loved. They rolled across the cave floor, each seeking advantage. "Now!" someone shouted. The warriors had loosened enough rocks. With a grinding roar, part of the cave ceiling collapsed, sealing the passage, but Dakota, Nora, and several warriors were on the wrong side, trapped with the remaining soldiers. The collapse had knocked everyone down, in the dust and confusion. Nora pressed her hand to her bleeding side and looked for Dakota. He was struggling to rise, blood running from a gash on his forehead. Morrison lay motionless nearby, struck by falling rocks. "This way!" One of the warriors had found another passage, smaller, older. It might lead out or to a dead end. But staying meant death or capture, supporting each other. The small group stumbled into the passage. Behind them, they could hear soldiers regrouping. Morrison's voice weak but venomous. "Find them. Kill the savages. But bring me the woman!" The passage twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small chambers, other times narrowing so much they had to crawl. Nora's wound blazed with every movement, and she felt wetness spreading down her side. Dakota half carried her, his own injuries forgotten in his determination to save her, after what felt like hours. They emerged onto a narrow ledge high on the mountainside. Dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Below, they could see soldiers searching the lower caves, but their position was hidden by an overhang. "We need to stop the bleeding," Dakota said, easing Nora down against the rock wall. His hands were gentle but urgent as he examined her wound. "The bullet passed through. That is good, but you have lost much blood." One of the warriors, a skilled healer named White Crow, worked to clean and bind the wound with what supplies they had. The pain was excruciating, but Nora bit down on a leather strap to keep from crying out and revealing their position. "The others?" she managed to ask. "They should be through the mountain by now." White Crow said, "We will find them when you can travel." But even as he spoke, they heard sounds above. Soldiers had found another route up the mountain. They were being hunted like animals, and Nora was slowing them down. "Go," she told Dakota. "All of you. I'm the one Morrison wants. If he has me, no." Dakota's voice was final. "We have discussed this. Where you go, I go. Where you stay, I stay." "Stubborn warrior," she whispered, managing a weak smile. "Stubborn woman," he countered, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You think I would leave you now? After you took a bullet meant for me?" The soldiers were getting closer. The small group prepared to make a last stand on the narrow ledge. They had little ammunition left, but they would not be taken easily. Then, from across the valley, came a sound that made everyone freeze, cavalry bugles, but playing a different call. A column of blue-coated soldiers appeared, but at their head rode a familiar figure, Colonel James Hartley, known as one of the few fair-minded officers in the territory. The soldiers on the mountain hesitated, confused. Morrison's pursuit was unauthorized. He had convinced a captain to help him, but a colonel outranked them all. "Stand down," Hartley's voice carried clearly. "All troops, stand down immediately." It took time for the situation to sort itself out. Hartley had received word of Morrison's vendetta and had ridden hard to intervene. He climbed to the ledge personally, his weathered face grave as he surveyed the wounded. "Miss Campbell," he said, recognizing Nora despite everything. "Or, should I say, Peter Wynne. Your father and I served together briefly. He was a good man before the whiskey got him." "Colonel," she managed, wary despite his reasonable tone. Morrison overstepped. Hartley continued. "The stolen horses were recovered weeks ago, from white thieves." He knew this, but continued his persecution. He looked at Dakota. "You and your people are free to go. I'll see Morrison faces charges for this unauthorized action." "Why?" Dakota asked, suspicious of this unexpected mercy. "Because I'm tired of bloodshed based on lies," Hartley said simply. "And because Miss Campbell's courage has been noted. Anyone who inspires such loyalty, who bridges two peoples, perhaps there's hope for peace yet." He had his medics properly tend Nora's wound before allowing them to leave. As they prepared to depart, he pulled Nora aside. "You've chosen a hard path," he said quietly. "The world isn't ready for what you represent, but maybe, someday, it will be." They found the band camped in a hidden valley beyond the mountain. The reunion was joyful and tearful. Winona scolded Nora fiercely for her recklessness while carefully checking her bandages. Chief Red Sky formally thanked her for her sacrifice. That night, as the band celebrated their survival with what little they had, Dakota sat beside Nora's resting place. The firelight danced across his features as he took her hand. "No more waiting," he said firmly. "I nearly lost you today. Tomorrow, if you are strong enough, we marry. I have spoken to the elders. They agree. We have proven ourselves enough for 3 lifetimes." "Is that a proposal?" she teased weakly. "It is a statement of fact," he replied, but his smile was tender. "You will be my wife, Peter Wynne. We will face whatever comes together. No more running. No more hiding who we are to each other." "Yes," she whispered, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of blood and hope and tomorrow. Outside the teepee, the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Somewhere in the distance, wolves sang to the moon. The band was safe for now, though tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, a warrior and the woman he loved had survived against all odds. The fire crackled softly, and Nora drifted toward sleep in Dakota's arms. She had been willing to die for him, for his people who had become her people. Instead, she would live for them, with them, as them. The transformation was complete. She was no longer between worlds, but part of a new one they would build together. Morrison's hate had failed. Love, courage, and sacrifice had won the day. It was, perhaps, a small victory in a larger war that would rage for years, but tonight, it was enough. They were alive. They were together, and tomorrow they would be married under the vast Dakota sky. Firewoman had found her warrior, and he had found his star. Together, they would burn bright against whatever darkness came. The dawn of their wedding day broke clear and bright, painting the mountain valley in shades of gold and rose. Despite her wound, Nora insisted on preparing herself, with Winona and the other women helping her into the white doe-skin dress they had been secretly making during the long winter nights, beaded with patterns of stars and flames. It told her story in symbols that needed no words. Dakota waited in the center of the village circle, wearing his finest ceremonial clothing. His war wounds had been cleaned and bound, but he stood tall and proud, his eyes never leaving Nora as she approached, supported by Winona. Chief Red Sky performed the ceremony, his voice strong as he spoke the ancient words that would bind them. The entire band had gathered, even the wounded, to witness this union that represented more than just two people coming together. It was hope itself, proof that love could bridge the seemingly unbridgeable. As they exchanged vows in both Lakota and English, Nora felt the rightness of this moment settle into her bones. When Lakota placed a beautifully beaded band on her wrist and she reciprocated with one she had made during her recovery, tears ran freely down many faces. "You are now one," Red Sky declared. "What the Great Spirit has joined, let no man divide." The celebration that followed was modest. Their supplies were still limited, but rich in joy. Even Mahka, still recovering from his wound, managed to drum and sing. The children danced, and for a few precious hours, the hardships of winter and the terror of pursuit were forgotten. As tradition dictated, Lakota and Nora retired to their own teepee as the sun set. Finally, alone, they tended each other's wounds with gentle hands, marveling that they had survived to reach this moment. "My wife," Lakota murmured, testing the words in English and Lakota. "My star who chose to fall to earth." "My husband," Nora replied, tracing the line of his jaw. "My warrior who caught me when I fell." Spring arrived fully over the following weeks, transforming the valley into a paradise of wildflowers and running streams. Nora's wound healed cleanly, leaving only a scar that Lakota would kiss tenderly, calling it her warrior's mark. The band settled into a routine of hunting, gathering, and preparing for whatever the future might hold. Colonel Hartley proved true to his word. Morrison was court-martialed for his unauthorized pursuit and excessive use of force. Word spread through the territory that the Lakota band under Chief Red Sky was to be left in peace, by order of the military command. It wasn't a permanent solution, everyone knew that. But it bought them time. Time for wounds to heal, for children to grow, for love to deepen. On a warm morning in May, Nora stood at the edge of camp, watching Lakota teach young boys to track deer. Her hand rested on her belly, where new life had begun to grow, a secret she would share with him tonight. The morning sickness had confirmed what Winona's knowing looks had been hinting at for weeks. "You look content," Winona said, joining her. "I am," Nora replied simply. "More than I ever thought possible." "Good. You will need that contentment. The child you carry will be born between worlds. As you were reborn, it will not be easy." Nora smiled. "Nothing about this life has been easy, but it has been worth every hardship." As if sensing her thoughts, Lakota looked up from his teaching and caught her eye. The love in his gaze still had the power to steal her breath. He excused himself from the boys and walked to her, his movements still those of a warrior, but softened by peace. "You have something to tell me," he said. It wasn't a question. He had learned to read her as well as she read him. "Tonight," she promised, "when the stars come out." That evening, they sat outside their teepee, wrapped in a single blanket, watching the stars emerge one by one. When Nora told him about the baby, Lakota's joy was so profound it seemed to light him from within. He placed his hand reverently on her still flat belly and spoke soft words in Lakota, promises to their unborn child, prayers for its future. "Our child will know both worlds," he said. "We will teach them the strength of the Lakota and the knowledge of the whites. They will be a bridge, as their mother has been." "And their father," Nora added. "You walk between worlds too, my love." They decided to build a permanent cabin at the edge of the camp, a blending of both cultures, with log walls but arranged in the sacred circle pattern. As Lakota worked on it through the summer, other mixed families in the band helped, seeing it as a symbol of adaptation and survival. The cabin stood complete by autumn, just as Nora grew heavy with child. It had glass windows, a luxury Lakota had traded for, and a proper fireplace, but also traditional elements like painted symbols above the door and space for ceremony. On a crisp October morning, as golden leaves danced on the wind, their son was born. They named him Samuel White Eagle. Samuel for Nora's grandfather, White Eagle for Dakota's father. He had his mother's blue eyes and his father's strong features, a perfect blending of two heritages. As Nora held her son for the first time, with Dakota's arms around them both and the band celebrating outside, she thought of the journey that had brought her here, from the desperate woman fleeing Nebraska to Peta Win, firewoman of the Lakota, from loneliness to love, from exile to belonging. No regrets? Dakota asked softly, reading her contemplative mood. None, she said firmly. How could I regret the path that led me to you, to this? Through the cabin window, they could see the village preparing for winter, no longer with dread but with confidence. They had survived the worst and grown stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The world beyond their valley was changing rapidly. The frontier was closing, the old ways being forced aside. But here, in this hidden place, they had carved out something precious, a life where love transcended boundaries, where two peoples could become one family, where a warrior and his unlikely bride could raise their child in peace. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in impossible colors, Nora nursed her son while Dakota played his flute softly. The melody spoke of journeys ended and begun, of stars that chose to become human, of fires that warmed without burning. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The integration of two worlds was never simple, and their son would face struggles they could only imagine. But tonight, in their cabin that smelled of pine and sage, with their baby sleeping peacefully between them, they had everything. Dakota set aside his flute and drew his family close. You're burning with love, he whispered, echoing words from so long ago. Let me share that warmth. And, in the gathering darkness of the frontier, with stars beginning to shine overhead, they held each other and their child, three hearts beating as one. Proof that love could indeed conquer all. The fire in their hearth crackled softly, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, an owl called, and the wind sang through the pines. But inside, all was warmth and peace and the quiet joy of a love that had survived every trial to emerge stronger than ever. This was their happily ever after. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not a fairy tale, but a life built on courage, sacrifice, and the unshakable belief that two people from different worlds could create something new and beautiful together. In the years to come, their story would be told around campfires and in frontier towns, inspiring other unlikely lovers to follow their hearts despite the odds. But for now, they simply lived it, day by day, season by season, their love a steady flame in the wilderness of the changing West. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you tuning in from today? I'd love to know. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Nora and Dakota's journey in the comments below. Did their love story touch your heart as it did mine? Let's discuss.